Hey, all you beautiful people out there. Welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. A few months ago, a whole bunch of these kitchen sink comics reprints of Steve Canyon comic strips was on the Goodwill site, the auction site that they have. 21 issues. And nobody was bidding on them. And I'd been wanting to read the original Steve Canyon strips for a while. And if you have looked around on my channel or been here for a while, you know that I did a review of the Steve Canyon TV show from the 50s a while back. One of the better viewed videos on this little channel of mine, I must say. So I've been wanting to read the actual original strips. And I'd read a few in the 80s, but obviously not by Milton Caniff. It would have been people who had been brought on after he'd left the strip. So I had a tiny knowledge of the comic strips, but not very much. Wanted to read them from the beginning. Couldn't believe nobody was bidding on these things. I more or less got them for like about $1 a piece, something like that. And they were what, $2.95 back in the day. So not too shabby. Anyhow, so I've started reading through them, and they're great, like I knew they'd be. And I don't know if I'm going to do like a review of all 21 issues of this, but I want to at least show off one or two, kind of as a companion piece to the TV show review that I did. So here's the man himself, Milton Caniff, an Ohio State grad, which puts him in the Big Ten. That's acceptable, but I come from an Iowa Hawkeye family, so obviously Ohio State's the enemy. We'll let that go. So Kitchen Sink did a few comics like this, and these are great. If you can find any others, and can pick them up at a good price, I would say do it. This was published in January of '83. And so we also see other specific comics. Captain Victory, that was Kirby. Through the Wanderer, Erica Melnibone. Okay. So we got letters. Letterers? There is a letterer in there somewhere. We got letters. We see the last Terry and the Pirates strip that Caniff did. Another series I would really like to read when I haven't. Now, this came on December 29th, 1946. And so the first thing we actually get in here is a little bit of the history of how Steve Canyon came to be. And, part of it had to do with him getting control of a character so he can get better money for it. Now look, if you ever listen to comic book pros, and it's the same for comic strip pros, this is an issue. It's tough to get paid in this industry. And a lot of people get exploited, screwed, etc. And it was for the Chicago Sun. This is a big deal for them. It was going to go up against his old, we'll just say publisher, put it that way. And they promoted it heavily. So you get a nice little history lesson about the man and his work and what he was doing. And here we have Steve Canyon. A few other Happy Easter. He'll show up in volume 2. I haven't seen Reed Kimberly yet. Steve Canyon, January 13th to May 15th, 1947, by Milton Caniff. And when I was a kid, I always pronounced it Caniff. So if you did the same thing, it's okay. It's hard sometimes. So we also got a little background note about the character. Now, so the character, he's a vet. of World War II. He was not a hotshot fighter pilot. He flew transports. And so, post-war, he starts an air freight service. And he's barely scraping by. This is his secretary, receptionist, does all the work other than flying. She's called Fita Fita, or is it, or maybe Feta Feta? Not sure how you pronounce it. That was like a name for the Marines, like the Samoan Marines, and she is Samoan. And so we start with this sort of fancy guy coming up and trying to get a meeting with Mr. Canyon. And he's away. Guy's not happy about it. And he's kind of a jerk right off the bat. And so it's kind of funny. Here's like your daily strips. And on day 4, we see Steve Canyon. But just a photo. And so Steve finally gets back. Now, what kind of guy is Steve? He's sort of what we would back in the day call a regular fella. He's a good guy. He's honest, forthright. He's heroic, but he's not like a, Dudley Do-Right sort of hero exactly. He's keeping ahead of creditors. His secretary's desperately in love with him. And, you got to be honest. You're kind of going, dude, what are you doing? She's pretty rad. What's wrong with you? I don't know. He has sort of a penchant for dangerous dames. And he's going to get one in the form of Copper Calhoun. Very wealthy woman. She's taking over. I think she took over like her father's business empire and runs it ruthlessly and well. And so she needs to hire somebody so that she can go overseas and check on her holdings post-war. So obviously some of these things would have been in the possession of the Empire of Japan. She needs to figure out what's going on with these holdings now that the war is over, and she can get back in touch with them, and she wants Steve Canyon to fly her there. Good opportunity for Canyon and his company. Now, she has people close to her that aren't real happy about this. And so here we get a small scene. Let's see if we can hold this up a little closer. Of Steve Canyon getting into a bit of a scrap so you can see sort of how Caniff does the action shots. And you'll notice this panel right here reproduced on the cover. And he, he's a two-fisted American hero. He kicks a little butt is what he does. And it's a comic strip. If you've never really read comic strips, they don't move at a lightning-fast pace. These are like your dailies, Monday through Friday. 3 or 4 panels, maybe 5, depending on how narrow they wanted the panels to be. And then you'd have Sunday strips that took up a little bit more room. And so you kind of keep the story simmering during the week. And then you could get a little bit more into it in that big Sunday strip. Now, Caniff had a definite art style all his own. He loved drawing these sort of dangerous bad girls, and you're going to get plenty of them. What I enjoy, though, is how he introduces the characters in his strip. We start off actually without Steve Canyon. Then we get Steve Canyon showing up. You see he's a regular guy. People like him. But he's got his problems. We meet Copper Calhoun, who's going to be sort of the love interest, who's going to move the story forward. Now we're going to meet his crew. So the word goes out to his guys, hey, we got a job. Let's get going. Oh, it is Feta, Feta. Okay, it was spelled Feeta. Okay. And so now we get each of these guys, and we see one of them. This is Breck Nazaire, out with a girl. So he's kind of a ladies' man. We get his radio man, who's got kind of a long-suffering wife because he's always away. And she's like, you see her here. He's like, hey, yeah, sure, Steve, I'll be right over there. And the president said the war was supposed to be over. I'm sorry, that's not the radio guy. Here's the radio man. He's lives at home with mom, I believe. So we get to meet each of these guys in turn. They get like a full strip devoted to each of them. And it's very much sort of like classic American stock characters. And so much of the time. And it's an interesting time as well. If you're in like history classes and such, you have World War II, it ends in 1945. And the next thing you're going to be studying is the 1950s. And probably the Korean War. And there's this gap that kind of gets overlooked a little bit. An important time period. And here you get to see at least this depiction of our veterans and what they were going through and who they were. And again, it's nice seeing guys who are sort of more air freight than hot shot pilots and all that stuff. So the story ultimately comes down to Steve Canyon, and there's look at some of these shots. Look at this shot down here. You get her in the foreground. You got this guy. Now he's going to be trouble that Steve's going to have to deal with. He's trying to steal from Copper Calhoun, but he's going to pose as a good guy. Except Steve doesn't quite trust him right off the bat. Remember, ladies, guys pick up problematic guys sometimes better than you do. If you got a guy friend who's telling you this dude you're into is, might listen to him. He could be wrong, but you might want to listen to him. And vice versa, right? But I just love the posing. You got these characters back here, all these women. Amazing. He did amazing work. This was just, part of the fun was just, interesting flathead on the women. He had his own style, just like Kirby, just like all these guys back then. But everything they draw makes sense within the style that they're doing. And so you got the noisy Americans, you got the aw shucks good American Steve Canyon. I love the dude on the radio because he's sort of that engineering kind of attitude. And a lot of this boils down to the bad guy and his machinations. And he wants to get rid of Steve Canyon because he knows he's going to be trouble. And Copper's sort of falling for him, and she's very aggressive, and she's very stubborn. So if she decides this guy's okay, she's not going to believe he's not okay. Plus, you got a lot of flirtation between Copper Calhoun and Steve Canyon. And so there's an aspect of her going, oh, you're just jealous, And that kind of gets on her nerves. There's a lot of, in the Caniff strips, there's a lot of parrying, dodging, etc. between men and women. It's never just a matter of, I love you too. No, it's like they're always going after each other and trying to get the kind of the upper hand. Although with Steve Canyon, he's not that kind of guy, but you know what I mean. Also, you get a ton of slang. You get more slang in these than a lot of film noirs. It's great. You get a real picture of the period, what was going on. Obviously, it's imagination. It's from one guy's point of view, you know. But, I mean, it still gives you a glimpse at that post-war period. It's really interesting. Some other nice work in the car. There's nothing the guy couldn't draw. And keep in mind, I mean, look at some of the detail on this page. Right? I know it's hard to get the focus right, but all that ink work. And this is a comic strip. This is a daily comic strip. You get this for the price of a daily paper, which everybody was going to be buying anyways back in the day. And you got more than just this. You got tons of amazing comic strips. I mean, the daily newspaper, once upon a time in the United States, was one of the most amazing comic books you would ever buy. Forget the stuff that's on the shelf in 1946 with Superman, Batman, Green Lantern. That's all great. Pick up a newspaper for 10 cents and you got a page of amazing comics, maybe a couple, and then the Sunday. Oh, unbelievable. And so ultimately, of course, they kind of figure out what's going on. And Steve and his guys managed to get away from the authorities, who were sort of fooled by this guy. And Copper Calhoun's bodyguard, who has had a chip on his shoulder about Steve the entire time, and was given a bit of a rough treatment by Canyon's men, really comes through in the end. So it's a great story for that character. Great stuff. And as this thing ends, Copper ends up quite injured. So does Steve. I'm sorry, that was her bodyguard. They have a nice moment. Now Copper's going to be ultimately okay. But so as they're flying back to the United States, a couple people get on board the airplane. And by the way, you get this nice bit. They get back, and here's what they're doing. Here's this guy. Now he was a jockey. I don't think he served in the war because he was too short. So he's an ex-jockey, and he's got a big girlfriend. Do not disturb. And we get this guy, the theater, the nightclubs. So each character, you get this fantastic little montage. The radio guy is doing his ham radio stuff. The mechanics doing family stuff. The ladies' man is seeing all the ladies. And what's Steve get? He's got bills to pay. And he's got Fita telling him, Steve, we're losing our shirts here. Because obviously the tour with Copper Calhoun did not go quite as planned and didn't get them as much money as they had hoped. But we get a couple new people who show up in their life at the end of Volume 1 who are going to cause them a lot of trouble. And that'll be one of the major stories in Volume 2, which will also introduce Happy Easter, who's a character who I believe shows up a bit. Look at that profile on that guy, who supposedly took a bullet to the head and survived. He's literally called Bullet Hole Pete in person. That's his name. Bullet Hole Pete in person. I love it. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that art. That face. This guy could draw faces. And he doesn't draw faces in a realistic way. He does it in a cartooning way. And here we get Fita holding unpaid bills. And so, and she kind of says, look, I got a job offer. And he's like, what? You know, and she's like, dude, will you just ask me to marry you? I'll stick around. And he can't quite get himself to do that. And so we're going to get a whole new story in Volume 2 involving Bullet Hole Pete in person and his daughter, who are con men, who are mixed in with a rough crowd, and find a way to use Steve Canyon to their own benefit. We also get to see some early jets. 4 P-80s, eastbound. See, they're P-80s still. They're P-80s still. P stood for patrol, and then eventually the Air Force was going to rename that designation for F, for fighter. And so, but we're still in 46, so we still have P-80s instead of F-80s. And there we go. To be continued in the next issue of Steve Canyon magazine. Plus, meet Madam Lynx and Happy Easter in a tale of oil and espionage. So we're going to get a couple different storylines there. What do we got here? Steve Canyon shirts. We got the Spirit. We got Mystery. We got the Rocketeer. Oh, this was a good time to be into comic books because we were getting so much of the classic stuff reprinted, and it was a great time for folks who were interested sort of in the history of comics. You wanted to deep dive into it and really get a sense of things and weren't just, in it for the monthly adventures of Spider-Man, but who really appreciated the art involved. And the comic strip art, it's a real sort of American original. Can we get that thing? See if we can get this to focus. Come on, guys. I don't want to end blurry. Maybe we'll just do that. Okay, ready? We're going to try to focus this thing. There we go. Hot diggity dog diggity. Comic stripping, which sounds like comedians taking their clothes off, but the art of comic strips is an amazing thing. If it's not something you've ever really gotten into, there's a lot of reprints out there. They're not always that affordable. You could probably find some at the library. The first vintage comic strips that I ever found, I found at the library. There was one that was like classic Dick Tracy. There was a Buck Rogers. There was Pogo. That's the first place I've learned about Pogo. So they're going to be out there, and you could probably find stuff online as well. It's distinct from comic books in a lot of ways, and the best comic books understand the specific sort of the language of cartooning. But a lot of comic books sort of have lost that over the years. The way to cartooning lets you exaggerate to make things more real, basically. And you read these old things and you really get a sense of what these guys were capable of when they were at the top of their game. So Milton Caniff's Steve Canyon from Kitchen Sink Comics back in '83. I got 21 of these bad boys. I've read through the first 2. They're fantastic. Absolutely fantastic reads. Action, adventure, comedy, a little bit of romance. Very creative storylines, too. The second volume has one that's kind of a fun one with misunderstandings on a global scale, causing problems for Steve and the crew. Fun. If you can find these out there, I highly suggest you get them. But really, almost any old comic strip work from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. If you can find it, go find it, read it. I'm talking from the masters. You're gonna be amazed. You're gonna be amazed at what these guys could do with a few small panels in a newspaper. The stories that they could weave. I mean, the Popeye stuff is unbelievable. If you know Popeye from the cartoons, they're fun and I love them. If you don't know Popeye from the comic strips, you don't know Popeye. Those things were unbefreaking-believable. So go take a look. Go find them. But Steve Canyon, I can tell you, well worth the money that I paid. Boy, did I get lucky. But if I'd paid 2 or 3 times as much, they would have been worth it. Milton Caniff was a friggin' genius of cartooning. So go find his stuff. Go check it out. I think you'll be very happy. Well, what do you think, folks? Are you a fan of Steve Canyon, of Milton Caniff, of comic strips, of cartooning? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Maybe think of subscribing. Maybe share with a friend, especially if there's a friend out there who enjoys this kind of thing. Maybe he'd like to take a look at some of this stuff, because obviously these particular reprints they're way out of print. These suckers are from, what did I say, 83, I believe? Yeah, January of 83, so good gravy. I mean, this book is as old now as the freaking original comic strips were when this book was published. So they might not be easy to find. Maybe somebody out there would like to take a look at it. I'll probably do a few more of these. I don't know if I'll do every single volume. Maybe I will do every single volume. What the heck? I got time. We'll go through and you'll see how he builds the world of Steve Canyon. Fantastic. Until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little fun out there. I'll see you again, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.